Hello, Zaheer. How are you going today?
Hi Zoe, thanks for having me. I'm doing great, thanks. And yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm so excited to have you and learn a bit more about how you're going in Mauritius. So, first of all, for people that don't know who you are, tell us who you are and what you do and where you're based.
I'm an urban strategist. I'm based in Mauritius, and right now I'm based from home. I think like everybody else.
Yeah. So, tell us what's happening in Mauritius specifically. Like, are you guys in lockdown like much of the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think we actually started lockdown earlier than Australia. I think it's been 45 days we've been under lockdown,
Okay.
and this is going to be extended until the 1st of June.
The 1st of June. Okay, wow. So, still another month.
Yeah, yeah, it's very long. And our lockdown was kind of different as well because it just started like no prior announcement, just immediate lockdown. And after a week or so, it went under full lockdown, which meant also supermarkets were closed without prior announcement as well. So it's like was chaos for the country. Nobody knew how to feed themselves and so on. But interestingly, while this was happening, we saw the emergence of smaller businesses starting doing online deliveries. So it was kind of interesting as well, seeing an immediate competition with large hypermarkets from small businesses.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. So what are the main things that you see, like, what are the main things that have changed significantly?
Um, the work from home is pretty new in Mauritius because in terms of scale, we are a tiny island. It's like you take from the north to the south, it's only like 51-hour drive. And so yeah, the work from home is pretty much changed, and we are also introducing a COVID-19 bill, which apparently will have components of work from home more laid out. So this will pretty much change the future of work after COVID as well, because we'll have the bill as legacy from this. And in terms of work structure as well, because businesses are impacted, like for the construction, the architectural sectors, this pretty much changes because they don't probably need the staff for 8 hours a day anymore. So we are being brought on more flexible contracts, which allows us to do other jobs as well. So this is changing the industry pretty much and abruptly.
What are some of the biggest disruptions for you?
Um, I'm finding myself working more actually. And I'm writing a lot at the moment. I started a book I'm just finishing this week. I'm doing a series of articles with Art Daily. I don't know if you noticed, on the future of architecture and cities post-virus. And I'm doing a few research articles as well on the impact of COVID on cities and urban planning. So it's like most of my research energy has been poured immediately on this. And I'm producing actually more work than ever because I feel the urgency of the situation to contribute. And I don't, I don't know, for me, I can't stay idle. And the COVID-19 brought lots of idle time during this lockdown. So I'm just channeling my energy into this.
Mm. Have you got any kind of early findings from your research?
I'm doing mainly perspective and opinion articles, but interestingly, I've been writing a lot on data protocols on how increased sharing could lead towards more enhanced big data sets. And then from big data sets, we can have, how to say, in-depth findings, artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms could use those larger data sets to produce better decisions.
Mm.
This particular research article was published in February. And interestingly, later, like a few weeks later, then Apple and Google announced their partnership on sharing their
Mm.
mobile platforms to share data. So it was quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is really interesting. And I think like we're going to see a lot of changes across the board, particularly like I've been talking to a lot of people around, changes for humans, like as in remote working and all those type of things. But you've got me thinking more about now, you know, the systems and the protocols behind what's happening that most people, unless we're working in this space, won't actually know that that's changed necessarily. They hopefully will just see, or depending on what area they're working in, obviously, but they'll see the impacts of those, which hopefully are better decisions based on, you know, data and that type of thing. And then using technology, advanced technology, to help us make decisions. Yeah, it'll be really interesting.
There's also the aspect of it's like a whole new system thinking for us. I'm currently writing an article on universities at the moment, how it will change universities. And interestingly, when we look at universities, there's a whole lot of infrastructure, parking spaces, departments, lots of buildings, labs, and so on. It's like investing piles of cash into a rich real estate portfolio, which then students can find attractive to invest into certain product offerings from that university. But now all of a sudden universities are closed around the world. And universities which are sustaining heavily from a foreign student base, they don't really know what's the future of this university and how long this will extend. So suddenly smaller universities which adopted online learning are now better off than larger universities which are trying to protect their reputation by being a more traditional university. So we're seeing kind of interesting competition emerging as well from those traditional brick and mortar university, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah, I've been thinking, I haven't done research, but I've been thinking about this, so we should have a bit of a chat later. So the university that I'm at the moment, USQ, which is in Toowoomba here, so I'm doing a master's data science. And, you know, the course, I was on campus technically, but it was already offered as an online course. So the on-campus students got exactly, the on-campus, but also on-line basis. So it was quite easy. You know, if you couldn't make it to the class, it was all there and available. And I can't remember the exact percentages, but USQ has, I think, 70% or something of online students, you know, before, and most of them were mature age. So there was a much different demographic to, say, some of the prestigious universities around the world. And, you know, it was actually seen, you know, I guess from a university and prestige perspective, that it wasn't as prestigious because of the demographics and, you know, the fact that they had so many online students, but also they actually have students from all around the world and also regionally based as well. But anyway, that prestigious thing didn't really bother me much, and it's in my hometown. But now they are actually, and obviously there's, you know, early talk about that, they now will be okay and are actually haven't suffered as much as some of the other larger universities, because it was quite easy for them to switch onto online. Obviously there's, you know, practical components, not in my course, but say for nursing and physiotherapy and those type of things, and even ag was a bit, you know, obviously there'll be some changes and stuff there. And also I think that the international student intake is high, but not like the majority of their business or anything. Don't quote me on these things. I've just kind of read some articles and that type of thing. But yeah, and so I found it really interesting, that sudden switch in the dynamic, and then how they will be able to hopefully thrive moving on from this, because like you said, we don't know how long this will go on for. And yeah, so really interesting. And they've still got a huge campus obviously as well, in Toowoomba, and then some satellite ones. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do with that as well moving forward.
The switch from online is tricky as well from a sort of administrative perspective. From the side of, let's say, architecture and urban planning, where you have studio components, where you have to be there and working with your teammates in studios doing models or doing design. Because usually those, professional accreditation bodies would have this as a requirement for giving accreditation to the university. And if they shift to online, then this disrupts this sort of traditional process as well.
Yeah.
But in the urgent times when we are, where universities are forced to switch online, the question is now, are those professional accreditation bodies following through the same trend to allow this sort of online transition? So this is all kind of very interesting for the future of the university as well.
Yeah, that's so true, and that will be really an interesting space to watch as well. And I'm even thinking, now for assessments and those type of things, like we've had a lot of online, quizzes and that type of stuff, but the exam, particularly for like my statistics course, was, closed book, 1 page of notes, exams, go into a room, do the exam. Whereas now they've had to switch that and it's online and open book, because it's hard to stop. And I don't know how you get around that, actually. I don't know how you, and I've been thinking about, there must be a way that we do that. Maybe they give us a device, I don't know. But even then, yeah, really some things need to be sorted out. And how you do that, and how you have questions where Google's not going to help you, and those type of things. It will be really interesting.
I think the aspects of subjects as well would be quite interesting to observe, because demand for some subjects will increase and others will decline. So, for example, let's say for your case, there could be, will universities be ready to offer, I don't know, masters in data science and epidemiology, for example?
Yeah.
They're not really put together before, but suddenly there's an interesting rise in demand for that. And we will see most probably the emergence, let's say, popularity of joint degrees as well, because people understand that everything is interconnected, economics and urban planning, and I don't know. And how far will universities be flexible in this approach? I think will really get them make or break, I can say.
Yeah, and like I guess going back to your systems approach, will we see more integrated degrees in the future where you're bringing two things together, like you just said, and that's really what smart cities and smart communities are built on, right? That multidisciplinary approach. And rather than just having, okay, well, I'm a planner, so I do only planning. Can I actually, instead of doing like you 5 or 6 degrees, I don't know how many degrees you have, not everyone can dedicate their lives to it. Can we do a combination where you're a smart city planner or whatever the case may be?
And it's very important, like you say, in city, because the city, for me, the definition of a city is the foundation of everything. It has the services of transport, health, economics, water, like different multifaceted and layered dimensions. And for you to be really able to understand and to design something that's properly and contextually appropriate, you need to have some basic understanding of those dimensions and how they relate within each other. So if we do, let's say, a 10 PhDs on I don't know, real estate economics, it only remains this, and we don't really know how the block of land interacts with each other, what's the demand of energy, let's say, on the whole block, and how it relates into designing a sustainable and resilient system. So this kind of interdisciplinary thinking and innovation across domains is very, very important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, and some might say, well, you get that when you go to work, but can we fast track that in, our education and that type of thing? It would be an interesting concept to kind of consider. And then, I think before COVID, we probably didn't think too much about how everything interacted, day to day, because we just, took everything for granted, I suppose, like what was just happening. Whereas now, when one thing has shut down, not one thing, but, something has happened, then you see that multiplier effect, which in this case is a negative multiplier effect. And hopefully that when we, like for a smart city and a smart community, is supposed to be a positive multiplier effect, and we've just seen the opposite of that, which it's got me thinking differently. And like I was always thinking about these systems, kind of thinking, but now, we've got a real life example. You don't have to talk in theory anymore. Like if this happens, then, human behavior changes and whatever. So yeah, really
I
interesting.
think one aspect which is interesting as well from the that's architecture and planning side is usually, let's say your staff has all the competence and knowledge to design a better system. Your main how to say obstacle barrier is usually the developer, because they think they know you give me 40 luxury villa, I'll be able to sell them, I'll make my money, and I'm okay. And you can try as hard as you can to reason with them that this is not you can do better. And for them it's like they've always done like this, they know how to do it, they have the client base ready, they don't need to do any extra effort, and they will sell it. At the end of the day, the cash flow is important. But in this case, what's interesting is this virus impacted everybody severely. And the developers now will be forced to look into alternative measures and probably more sustainable measures, more resilient measures, because one, they have less money. And second, they also realize that they have to diversify their portfolio. So this will again reduce the amount of money they can invest into projects and get the most out, really the most out of it, while also having a sense of supporting the community as much as they can to transition out of this virus. So now we'll need not be professionally motivated, but we will be forced by the client through the development brief to redesign something completely new. And how much we can innovate, I think, will differentiate practice to practice on this.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been even thinking about, some of my contracts or contracts we were just about to put in. Now they have, and this is on a very, small level. I guess some of them are bigger projects, but, having clauses in there to cope or deal with, the COVID-19, but actually those clauses won't go away. They'll be generalized, but actually now we've got our eyes have been opened to this thing that we didn't realize was a risk, a huge risk, but it was probably, on the, it's on the catastrophic level, but it's, a rare occurrence. But now it's, going to creep up there, and so we're going to have different clauses and things, and that's going to be on a global scale with different projects and different, contexts and all those type of things. But yeah, the impacts are going to be so widespread. We won't, one individual person won't even, one individual country won't know all of them. So yeah, really interesting times as we move forward out of this.
The aspect that legislation, like you were saying, for your contract laws is very interesting, because we're seeing usually, technology moves at one speed, and legislation usually is very low. Yeah. It never follows at the same speed. But now we've been seeing legislation pass at such a fast speed. Yeah. Different countries around the world, most of them are turning up, like in Mauritius, who are doing a COVID bill. Different places around the world are doing the same thing. And it's just incredible. Like, we are seeing a disruption in just 3 months at a speed that we've never seen before, and will be very, very exciting. When we've been talking about data, for example, we've been seeing corporations and even governments turn towards data sharing as a sort of ultimate measure to contain the spread of the virus through technology. And we've been seeing data sharing standards. But then the question now starts: what happens to this data post-COVID? Because the bill is already there, the legislation, the frameworks are already there, and it, like, now we're doing it, for example, for a sense of community safeguarding, let's say. But after the crisis is over, then we'll turn back to look at our privacy. And then what happens to this data? So the legislation change as much as it did with the virus? So lots of questions as well, but very exciting actually.
Really interesting. And I think you've written some stuff on this on LinkedIn, haven't you? Yeah, I think I read some stuff. But in terms of, I guess, moving quickly, what it's shown to me is that when we want to get something done, when we focus on it because we have to, and again, it's, COVID didn't make us do that. The impacts around COVID made us do that, and we still, as governments around the world, had to decide how they responded to COVID. So that is a really important distinction, I think, because when we see it as so important that we have to respond, exponential things can happen. So, and obviously, we all needed to respond at this time, but actually we can do the same thing with other things that, if we think they are that important, then we can, this has shown that we can respond, at a exponential rate. And the things that are in place are barriers that can be, removed, shortened, whatever, where is necessary. But going to your point around, we doing all this data, and then maybe we'll look back on privacy. We need to then think about, if we are moving this quickly, what are those consequences, and can we mitigate some of those right now? Or is it, what do we need to mitigate right now? Can we lessen the impact? Who is it going to affect? Those type of things. Even if, we're still making those decisions because we're in an emergency situation, but we really need to take note of what those things are. So then, when we come out the other side, but we still want to make decisions quickly, that we actually are thinking about the people that are most impacted. And I think in most cases, people that are most impacted are normally the ones that are already impacted, the ones with the most at stake. And I think that's a consideration that we need to have front of mind when we are, moving so quickly.
Yeah, your argument of, the point that you raised on, we felt that it was an emergency situation and then we acted, is quite interesting, because lots of people are saying climate change has always been there, but why didn't we see any urgent action on this front? And for me, I feel it's like we can use this momentum, this COVID momentum, to try to push numerous changes which that we have, that we know are important for us, because the speed of legislation is passing, and the impact of those legislation and those mechanisms being implemented will have, for sure, an impact for decades, for years, if not decades to come. For example, we're talking about climate change. The IMF warns we are turning towards a steep recession. And when we look at past trends, recessions usually call for a spike in, even though we're noting that carbon emissions are decreasing at the moment, with previous studies, we see that after recessions, emissions climb up because governments are bailing out large and heavy industries, fossil fuel emitting industries. Mm. So when governments are turning towards fiscal mechanisms, bailout programs, we can already convince those entities, policymakers, that when they craft those legislations, either for climate change or for data, to look at the immediate solution, the short-term, the middle, and the long-term problems as well. So those can already be, I'd say, formulated in the policy mechanism in the first place, rather than only linearly thinking on the immediate term and then have large repercussions at the end.
I agree, and that's something we really need to consider. And I think on your point, sorry, this truck going past, on your point around, data and privacy, what it has also shown to me is that, how do I say, basically that if we need, that there's like a really fine balance. And I was talking to a guy from Denmark, Peter, the other day, and there's a really fine balance between the data that we want to be able to stop to spread the virus, and then the data that is crossing the line of privacy. And are we willing to give that up for a short period of time? But then, like you said, what happens to that data afterwards? And I think because we aren't literate enough to understand globally, we're not understanding what that data actually means. Like, what does it mean that somebody can track my location right now? And what does it mean if I say yes to that? What does it mean is the mechanism, can I trust the mechanism, that says it will be deleted after? And I think that's where, in times of emergency, we follow blindly. potentially. But then in times of good and abundance, we are, much more reserved and or conservative, not conservative, but just, it's not affecting us right now. So we don't think about it as much, I suppose, which is kind of saying the same thing. But I feel like we are more likely to opt into something in time of emergency without understanding the full repercussions. And then we're more likely to opt out when, oh, well, it doesn't matter, whatever. But on the flip side of that, that if we want to make good data-driven decisions from a planning and a government level, we want people to opt in, but we need to be able to explain what it is they're exchanging for their data, that data value. And I think there will be a really interesting piece after this of, all the data that was collected, what does it mean? Now that we know we can collect that data, what else can we do with it? But in a way that's, secure and private and all those type of things. So yeah, I don't know what I actually said there, but really interesting to think about all this complexity with data, which I think, we're thinking about data now, but there's so much data available, pre-COVID. But hopefully what it will do is bring data to the forefront again, so then we can actually start having more informed conversations about it.
Yeah. I think what's also interesting for me is when we look at, for example, smart cities, we know those, let's say you have 10 different operators and those corporations are managing data between themselves. And then because of the heavy data sharing legislations between corporations, this actually lowers their, let's say,
competitive advantage or proprietary.
Yeah, processing of this data as well, either to as a competitive advantage or to solve a particular immediate issue. What we are seeing right now is people are voluntarily, like you mentioned, sharing the data. And actually, when we talk about the platform that Apple and Google was preparing, is just actually a platform where data can ride on. They didn't actually share their data through the operating system because they won't be allowed to do this. So they only provided the underlying foundation, and people are developers are putting apps, and people are voluntarily sharing the data through those apps as well. So it's kind of interesting where we're seeing voluntary individual data sharing bypassing the, let's say, previous competitive advantage of corporations, which was they themselves, gathering the data of everybody. So we are seeing kind of a sort of democratization of the data landscape at the moment, and this is quite interesting. It's like citizen science in a way, where we're seeing that they need to do that, and we're doing it on our end, and we're seeing the emergence of smaller businesses coming up with different apps which are riding on those foundational structures laid by those corporations.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and it's also, that consent model as well, like, where people are opting in rather than someone else choosing, what data they're selling to somebody else or whatever, where it's that citizen kind of awareness going, okay, well, I'm going to share my data because I know it will help, whatever. Really, really interesting. And it will be interesting to see what continues, because, we talk about like the case has been made for COVID, that it's, emergency and stuff's happening or whatever. But yeah, there are many other cases that could be made that we could then not enforce necessarily. I mean, you could enforce, but then could make direct that same outcome, I suppose. Global scale.
The aspect of economics as well is very important, I think, for smart cities, because usually there's unfortunately a sort of luxurious brand to smart city because it's high tech and those product offerings are more expensive. But in a time of post-COVID, where last week 30 million Americans filed for unemployment, it reached the bar of 30 million, and around the world people are losing jobs. It's like we need to really tackle the issue of affordability, housing affordability, because else smart cities will only be a tool to further the economic inequality of families and communities around the world. So this will be really important of how to use leverage technology on bringing costs down, and most, even if possible, change the entire ecosystem. For example, do we need to own a house, or do we need just to look at a house as a company asset, where you buy shares in the company to get access to the unit, or you need the physical ownership? I think lots of things will change, and technology can help in that.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think I've been thinking a lot about, this basically, work from home experiment, global work from home experiment, and, that it's worked in a lot of cases. And again, I haven't spoken to every single person, but, and it'll be really interesting to see the research come out after this as to, who thought it worked, who thought it didn't, what were the productivity. I mean, obviously it's quite difficult because obviously you have got so many different factors, with health and mental health and, decreasing cash flows and all those type of things as well. It'd be really interesting. But just that we were, I guess, with face-to-face interactions, non-existent in most countries, stepping into the digital environment and making that normal, the way that has changed even the way I am processing the digital environment, which, I'm very used to being in, but it's risen the bar. It's like pulled up the bar on digital, and I've what's the word? Like, I'm experiencing it as if it was real life, and it's like this normal thing. It's normal now to go to a webinar in America because, I'm in the same spot. Whereas before, even if I might have done that, it wasn't normal in my head, so I wouldn't value it as much, or if it wouldn't be like as real or something like that. I can't quite work out, and I've got to write some stuff around this. So keen to your thoughts, but yeah. And for other people that weren't in the digital environment, it's been a huge, learning curve for them as well. And so what this has done is really risen that bar on digital. It was always seen as kind of less than, face-to-face was always king, and nothing can replace that, is, words that I've heard, whereas now it has had to. And I don't think that we should replace face-to-face totally, but it's really shown that we can build digital relationships, professional relationships. We can build trust digitally where it has been necessary to do so. And I think that will really open up opportunities for people that didn't have them before, purely because of where they lived or what their circumstances were. But only if they have the digital literacy, they have the connectivity, they understand what the data means when they hand that over, and they're not negatively, impacted or whatever, or understand what the impacts are. So I think it's really brought the smart community concept to the forefront for me. So keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think on the financial landscape as well, this represents your points you're raising quite well, because what we're seeing, companies are rushing left, right, and center, except technology, some key technology companies, where people who've been investing in there are suddenly seeing a boost in share value. Zoom, for example, since the start of the COVID-19, I think got a share price of 1,500% increase. That's incredible. But interestingly as well, we know, like now we've been seeing the technological backbone is key in sustaining our society today. But I'm collaborating right now with a friend from Cameroon in Africa for the Org Daily series. And last week, we communicate through emails, through WhatsApp, and some the occasional video conference. But last week in Cameroon, for the whole week, there was no electricity. And then we wonder, what about those less developing economies? Before they reach this technological adoption, they need some kind of basic amenities set up in stable, reliable electricity, water, and so on. So this is kind of a question, an important question where African countries need to ask and solve at the moment right now.
Mm.
We often say that Africa is often leapfrogging. They were the first in the world to adopt digital currencies, M-Pesa in Kenya.
Mm.
But often the underlying infrastructure is coming to terms. So heavy investment is required at the moment to help them to transition towards this digital economy. But the challenge right now with COVID is we're seeing loads of investment being redirected from existing projects, existing infrastructure projects towards a health system at the moment. And we saw 3 weeks ago, finance ministers called for an aid of 100 billion USD to the World Bank and the IMF. This adds to the existing 350 billion. So this was a debt of an incredible magnitude, and this wasn't even enough because they were redirecting money from everywhere just to address the short-term immediate crisis. But then at the end of this, when we see a clear endpoint, what will happen is this will create a debt of an incredible magnitude, and the continent will be requiring immediate additional cash injections, not only to repair the damage on the social and economic front, but also on the infrastructure cost, because then at this point, digital progress will be really low. Esports, for example, infrastructures, money that was channeling from those will be inexistent. So then there's actually a big discussion that will need to happen on the whole sustainability of this ecosystem of centralized money flows towards an immediate problem. And it joins your point where ultimately at the end we'll have, let's say, a big roundtable to discuss resiliency, because were we really resilient post this crisis, prior to this crisis?
Yeah, and I think we'll see that on like a really kind of, I guess, micro level and a macro level where, and I don't know if they're the right terms in economic speak, but you know, really small businesses will have to really take a look at themselves and go, you know, was this just the straw that broke the camel's back, or you know, were we sustainable, and then you know, this is unprecedented or whatever. But then yeah, on a government, a global level, we're going to have a lot of these same conversations. So you know, I think we really need to step back and actually have some of those. Hopefully we can, and we don't just, you know, go, okay, now we're out, let's just go back to BAU and let's just go back to the status quo and we'll just continue to do what we're doing, when actually we, you know, I think we're probably, there's a lot of places, businesses, people, whatever, or were already in crisis in their own insular way, but now that it's a global issue, that we then really need to take a serious look at not just the global issue, but then for ourselves as well, and for, you know, our communities. What do we want to look like in the future? You know, what do we want our futures to look like for our communities? So then we can actually make real change.
Yeah, interestingly, on your point of small businesses, I was reading a survey just last week on based on data from the US and the UK, where 50% of small businesses are expected to go bankrupt or will have severe long-term economic consequences for the next few years. And it's quite challenging. But then how can businesses which don't have money invest into transitional approaches to sustain the livability? So very difficult question. And also we see that governments are trying their best to invest to bail out those small businesses, but then large corporations are tapping in to siphon the money out. We saw the cases just 2 weeks ago in the US where the government, through the government's I forgot what's the program called, stimulus package of the US. Where, pardon?
I can't remember the exact name.
Yeah, where they invested billions of dollars, but the fund was empty in a matter of few days, where so many companies were applying. But you also saw major corporations. For example, one of the cases was Shake Shack, a giant fast food chain with over 6,000 employees, applying for a 10 million loan, where they obviously didn't need the money, and they in the end they returned the money for this. But then what happens to those small businesses which needed that money? Lots of questions are rising on this end. And if small businesses lose or go bankrupt, what happens on the city scale? Where usually we say city gains in complexity and intricacy through the diversity of the business offerings. If we see 50 small businesses close, will this see the emergence of 2 major corporations that takes the 25 space on the whole city block? So this we need to follow urban planning legislation as well as with those economic policies and programs, because this impacts on the livability and the richness of the urban fabric at the end.
Yeah, and that's such an, again, back to your systems thinking, like that is such an important point that we need to consider, that has, you know, that has nothing to do with necessarily the COVID-19, but it's an impact of that may go under the rug if we don't have planners, if we don't have, you know, people thinking about that, and also them in the room when these decisions are being made of how we move forward. Because it's, yeah, it's not just, you know, okay, we've got health, we've got economics, we've got, you know, even small business advocates. You actually need then the city and the urban fabric, like you said, you need those considerations, because otherwise they may, and not by anyone's you know, fault or whatever, it's that they'll just get missed because they haven't been thought about. And there'll be so many particularly in regional areas, it's so important that we need to, yeah, that we have that multidisciplinary approach, so we can make sure we make these decisions that will, you know, and like you said, decisions we make now are going to affect not just now and next year, it'll be generations potentially. So yeah, heavy stuff.
I'm also reading a lot on supply chains at the moment, because interestingly, we've been seeing how the impacts of supply chains are disrupting economies globally. First, it started with China with the lockdown there and the closure of the factories, which is the manufacturing capital of the world. Then it sustained when other parts, when China was opening, other parts of the world were closing. So this disruption sustained over a long amount of time, where even other competing economies that were trying to bridge the gap couldn't get into the supply chain. So now we're seeing different parts of the world missing on equipment, on health equipment or food as well, and how this is underlying the need for local resource production, really autonomous, self-sufficient cities in the end, and how the link between rural and urban areas are being accentuated. Because some right now, some people are writing that rural areas are better off. In a sense, they have the food because they sustain their own community and they feed the city. But on the other end, the city is where the resources are, where the healthcare is. So there's a kind of mismatch between those two, and we need to strengthen the link between the rural side and the city, and also review the global supply chain so that it's more resilient.
Yeah, that's such an important point. So yeah, again, another interesting complex web. And then also going back to like the consumer actually thinking about where our stuff comes from is another thing that, you know, we'll add to the list of things to think about, because yeah, I think that will be really interesting. And I've always been like thought about how you know, we set up hubs that do a certain thing and then no one else does it because it's all in that hub, and that yeah, it does really and it's all well and good when everything's going well and whatever else, but if those hubs I think can be, and I'm talking more, you know, these innovation hubs that maybe are focused on mining or manufacturing or whatever, but yeah, as soon as that is cut off, then there's yeah, the supply chain's out the window. And the decentralized approach, which is actually quite, I guess it depends what you're talking about, but decentralization is frowned upon in kind of urban planning sense, but what aspects can we use to strengthen our ecosystems and our resiliency of specific, I guess, communities and supply chains and that type of thing.
Yeah. There's an interesting concept emerging in France at the moment through the election of Anne Hidalgo, where there's an urban thinker called Carlos Moreno. He's promoting what he calls a 15-minute city. For him, you need to have access to your basic services in a circle of 15 minutes. And the mayor, Anne Hidalgo, is the current mayor of Paris and rerunning for election. And that's one of the key programs as well, sustaining the 15-minute city. So it kind of rejoins the idea of self-sustenance and kind of, let's say, smart decentralization, where you have nodes, centralized nodes, different parts of instead of like a massive, you know, mega factory. It's more like a sort of resilient series of interconnected resilient systems.
Mm. Yeah, the Superblock in like Spain
Yes.
is, I always found that a really interesting concept. And yeah, when I was on my Churchill fellowship, I called it out as one of it is a smart initiative because it's about that smart decentralisation, and for Australia, I feel like it's more palatable than some of the other density conversations, particularly in regional areas. I'm thinking because it makes more sense. It's not about. I mean, it is making things more dense, obviously, but you could actually take a lot of those good concepts and then put them into regional areas to actually then start having those conversations. Because I think that if you go too far ahead in some of the regional areas, then you completely get lost and you don't get anywhere. Whereas if you kind of do that incremental change and kind of can show that, things can work, particularly with cycling, walking, and then, it's a smart, sensible decentralizing of services that you need, then you can kind of have a better conversation of, well, now you don't have to use your car as much. Whereas if you go straight to give up your keys, people will, run you out of town. So anyway, interesting.
Yeah, but you have a very good point on saying that we shouldn't go too far into regional areas because then we'll be encouraging sprawl. And interestingly, 2 weeks ago, there was a controversial open-ed in Los Angeles Times where one person was writing and praising sprawl, saying that looking at data, it looks like the spread of COVID-19 is less in sprawl as opposed in densified areas. And people are now, I see you rolling your eyes with reason. And people are now writing against that, where they're saying that no, the data is wrong. And so that's why the import that we need a multidisciplinary team where we have urban planners together with scientists, with economists working out the reason of the need to densify those urban areas and to create more resilient systems, and not only go into all different directions and allowing cities to sprawl out of control.
Well, it's been so great chat with you, Zaheer. I have to run because I have to go to another meeting. But thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. It's great to hear, I guess, about what you're up to. But yeah, just I remember, our podcast. I can't remember when that was originally, and I remember having such a great conversation there. So yeah, this has been awesome. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks very much, Zoe. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have to have another conversation soon, get a bit of an update maybe after your lockdown comes out or, your restrictions decrease. We're seeing some decreases at the moment in our restrictions. So it'll be interesting to see what the next phase looks like.
Hopefully we'll have you in Mauritius when this happens.
Yeah, that would be cool. Okay, I will say goodbye, and it was really great to talk to you, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Zaheer. Bye.